The Short Game is listener-supported on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and join us on our Discord, head to theshortgame.net or patreon.com/theshortgame. Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Reagan Kelly, and I'm joined this week by two awesome co-hosts and a guest.
Nate Heininger.
And I'm Shane Kelly.
And new to the show, and thank you so much for joining us. Today, I am very excited to have on the show Anna Anthropy. Anna, thank you so much, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks. And it's funny, I've always wanted to have you on the show because I think you're so interesting and that your work is so interesting. But it's funny that we're here talking about the Mr. Driller series, and specifically Mr. Driller Drill Land, which I didn't know was passion that we both shared until I saw you tweeting about it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I don't. I'm like a caterpillar that's like become a butterfly, and I've sort of like left a lot of digital game bullshit behind me. I feel like I don't really play a lot of these games anymore because I'm bad at video games. I don't have time for them.
Here, the short game.
Yeah,
finally, one of us.
But Mr. Driller is like Mr. Driller Drill Land is a game that I imported to play on like my GameCube with like a fucking boot disc. Like,
oh man.
But yeah, I was like so thrilled that this game was like getting an English release like after like almost 2 decades, bizarrely.
It is bizarre.
Yeah.
What could possibly have led to this?
I don't honestly know. And I'm sure that there's been some developer interview or something that I've missed, but like, yeah, the similar experience for me. I didn't ever quite do the level that you did in terms of actually importing the game to play on an actual GameCube. I didn't really have the ability to play this game until until basically it became really trivial to soft mod Wii's and run GameCube games on those, because GameCubes were region locked, right? Like you would have had to did you have to import a Japanese GameCube in order to do this, or did you have like a region free?
So, it's funny. Now there was a boot disc that I had. And so you had to do this like weird ritual where you would put in the boot disc, start up the GameCube with the boot disc in it. The boot disc, you would take it to a screen where it was like, okay, you can now take out the boot disc and put in the other game. Then you would put in your Japanese game and hope that it all works. And then you would be playing your Japanese game.
That sounds like a huge pain in the ass.
It totally was, but it also felt really cool. Like it was like a kind of witchcraft to like get games running. And it was a lot less expensive and scary than modding your GameCube.
That is pretty sweet. How did you manage at the time to actually understand these very complex menus that this game has? Because even if I didn't have it translated to English, I think I would have had to really messed around in here to even get it to load. There's multiple levels of menus and extensive cutscenes before you're able to begin the drilling.
Yeah, so here's the thing. A lot of the menuing is not that complicated. I say menuing like I'm like a speedrunner or something. The menus are generally not that complicated. The most complicated place, the place where it interacts with play the most, is in the Druaga one, where you have your menu, and we'll get into what all different forms of gameplay are, but where you have like an inventory of items that you're using. But even there, you can still tell what a lot of the things are, because they use English letters to signify colors. You can tell based on the color of the stone what it's used for, whether it's like, if I see that this one is red and it has, R next to it, that destroys red blocks. And then the other ones you can kind of memorize. So this was a thing that I actually put effort into doing in order to play this game, because this was my only recourse for playing this like crown jewel of this series that I was really invested in back in the day. And I mean, I'm glad that it's no longer the case, because it was like kind of a process, but it was doable.
Now, speaking of this series, I read that this is when this came out originally in 2002, this was the fourth Mr. Driller game in 4 years. So, like, Project Drill was on fire at this time.
Fourth in 4 years / fifth in 5 years, or
Wow.
fifth in 4 years rather. This game and Mr. Driller A for the Game Boy Advance were kind of companion games. They came out around the same time, so they were both released in 2002. But yes, previous to that, it's been one Mr. Driller a year since 1999.
Which feels so bizarre to me. My interaction with the Mr. Driller series started on the Dreamcast version, and I was late to the party because I didn't get a Dreamcast until people were picking them up at thrift stores, which is exactly what I did, and all of my Dreamcast games were, CDRs and all of that. And I think I picked up Mr. Driller because it was at the time like the similar to the experience you had with the GameCube. On the Dreamcast, you had to, if you were pirating games like I was at the time, please don't tell, you would have to put a boot disc in, or they'd have these special modified versions that had to be chopped down to fit on a CDR. But Mr. Driller was one of the few games that didn't have to be chopped down at all because it's extraordinarily simple. And so the original Mr. Driller was one of those games that was just like an easy, quick burn that was, a great thing to pirate on the original Dreamcast. And I played an absolute ton of the original Dreamcast game. And I had no idea for actually quite a few years that the series had continued past that, even though I think there were other American releases. I think that one, but not both of the...
Mr. Driller and Mr. Driller 2, I believe, are the only ones that ever got... I don't know if Mr. Driller 2 got an American release. I know it got a European one.
Yeah, that's, I think, what it was. Like, it got an English language release, but I don't think it was in stores here or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got started with... I just found the Game Boy Color version and kind of fell in love with it. And I think I played pretty much every single one of them after that. The pace of them is like really incredible, like one every year. But I think a lot of that comes down to like the fact that each game is like pretty much the same thing. Like, at least in terms of, like, as you said, the actual play is very simple. Each game has like some new assets, new style, but like generally very few modifications to the basic format, with the exception of Mr. Driller Drill Land, which is like 5 like incredibly heavy modifications.
It is the symphony of this game, of this series. There's
Nice.
In a way it seems crazy that they like released this whole series of games one after another, but in a way it was mostly just them hitting different platforms, and rather than just doing that with ports, they kind of took a different spin or a little bit of a different tweak on the game each time they sort of brought it to a new platform, which I think is a really nice approach, being able to say, okay, you liked Mr. Driller on the PlayStation. Well, here's the Game Boy Advance port, but it's not just exactly the same thing. It's got a couple of new things, like a new character to play as, that kind of thing. But by doing that so quickly, it seems like they sort of just kept expanding and expanding the Mr. Driller family to the point where suddenly we had this like, cinematic
The Mr.
universe.
Driller cinematic universe, yes.
which is so crazy to me. So, okay, a couple things. One, I stopped questioning how games come into existence ever since Cadence of Hyrule, the most unlikely combination of two games I've ever seen. So if Cadence of Hyrule can exist, then anything in video games can exist. Also, all your complicated efforts to get this to run on your Dreamcast and GameCube, I never did anything like that, but Reagan, I have to say, I also pirated a ton of computer games at that time, and it just felt like that same weird thing where you had to download a thing, open it in that, close that, open another thing, all just to get my like copy of Civilization 3 that I was trying to steal to run. But mostly,
this is the police.
Reagan, you said, yeah. Oh no, Reagan, you said you were late to the party. I guess, compared to the rest of everyone else on this call and maybe the Drill Land cinematic universe. But if you're late, then I don't know what you call me, because I didn't know about any of this until we downloaded this game for this show. I have somehow missed this entire existence. Obviously I know what Dig Dug is. I kind of thought it all stopped there. And so when I downloaded this game, and I've been really having a great time with it, I have no idea what's going on with all the obvious effort towards the characters and the world and everything that like this all sits on top of. From the outside looking in, I had no idea what anybody in this game was. It's been great, but I'm really excited to hear from those of you who have been engaged with this series for a lot longer, like why or how any of this exists, because they make some choices and they really go for it in this game, and it's very funny. If I imagine I'm not going to be alone, because this is getting pretty popular, who download this game and be pretty shocked by the amount of like cartoons and character development in this game that like is kind of hard to follow.
Yeah, see, your problem is you play Dig Dug, but you never stop to question whether Dig Dug fucked.
I mean, I think we all assumed the answer was yes.
Yeah, I guess, when you put it that way, yeah, I guess I never did stop to think that. And I don't know that I should now stop to think that, but we have an answer, I guess.
But Namco has a canonical answer for you.
Well, before we get into the incredibly deep lore here, because I think that is one of the great joys of this game, is that it's a completely unnecessary and incredibly detailed lore. But before we get into that, I think we probably need to take a second here, at least relatively close to the top of the episode, and talk about the basics of Mr. Driller gameplay. Like, what is the Mr. Driller series? What type of game is this? And do you want to kind of like lay out what a Mr. Driller game is?
Listener, I want you to picture like a falling block style game, like a puzzle game, like not quite like Tetris, maybe more like Puyo Puyo, where you're kind of dropping these colored blocks. You're trying to match them. If you get a certain number of blocks of the same color next to each other, they disappear, and then things fall and combo, and you get big points, and it's cool. It looks very pretty, except instead of being this kind of like bodiless observer, you have a body. You are a tiny person with a tiny drill, who is inside of this well of blocks, and you are incredibly squishy. And so you are just drilling through these blocks, trying to make a path for yourself to try and get from the kind of top of this well all the way to the bottom. And as you do that, you leave gaps behind that cause blocks to fall with gravity, creating combos, and occasionally dropping things onto your head and squishing you. And so you're basically trying to navigate within this like chain combo puzzle game, trying to like not get killed.
God, that is so obvious. Again, I am brand new to this game, so I've not thought about it that much. And that description of it has changed the entire thing to me to be like a nightmare scenario. Now I've thought of it as like
it's a little nightmare.
Yeah, it's like I had been thinking of it as like they're in there because they want to be and they just love drilling. But now that they're like trapped in a Puyo game or trapped in a Tetris game, your description is very, very accurate. I'm just more sad for these.
It's a really vulnerable experience.
Yeah, and layer onto that the fact that you're running out of air the entire time. So the entire game has this feel of like that one moment in Sonic 2 where you are underwater and there's and you can't quite get to the bubble of air fast enough.
God, the sound of my nightmares for as a Sega kid that is haunted. That has haunted me.
When you are actually crushed in this game, I think it's important to note that your winged soul does actually fly up off of the screen and go to heaven.
There is a driller heaven.
Yes.
and then you're revived, which has this implication about the cosmology and afterlife.
You think
of
Susumu has multiple souls?
Yeah, obviously he does.
Or
What do
Poochie.
you think lives are?
Yeah.
How about Horinger
God.
Z? Does Horinger Z have a soul that flies to heaven?
Horinger Z can take twice as many hits, which means that Horinger Z has twice as many souls.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
He has one soul in his head and one soul in his robot butt.
Like
So-
dinosaurs, yeah.
Exactly like dinosaurs.
So if you want to know what the lore of this game is like, I can't tell if they're being serious or not right now.
Yeah, so that's Mr. Driller, and if you played any of the previous Mr. Driller games, that's pretty much what you were in for. Like, you usually would pick an amount of depth that you needed to drill to. So, like, level 1 would be like 500 meters, each block being 1 meter. Level 2 might be like 1,000 meters, and then if you got really good at it, you might be doing 1,500 meters or something like that, and going for points. And that's pretty much what most of the previous Mr. Driller games were. And then this game, and there were little tweaks. So like a couple of the games would add a different type of item or something that would show up along the way. But this game gives you multiple different modes that let you play these different tweaks and variations on the Mr. Driller formula. And each of these, I think 5 different modes, kind of builds on that core.
Well, 6 if you count the Dreamin' Parade,
Oh, right.
which we should.
Of course.
And even 7 if you count the single moment action plot end game that
the
happens.
boss
yeah.
mode,
The-
right?
And then there's the multiplayer modes. Before we kind of get into what all the different modes are,
Yeah.
I just want to emphasize to the listener who's like never seen this game before, you should probably look up video of this, because it is, in terms of feeling, it is very different from a lot of puzzle games that might ostensibly be in the same genre as it, because it is so reactive, and it is so rapid fire. It's really interesting to play. I find that so much of it is like Reagan. I believe you're a shooting game man. Correct me if I'm wrong. So much of getting good at Mr. Driller is about like cultivating peripheral vision, the same way that like kind of shooting games kind of require you.
Mm-hmm.
There's also there's almost this rhythm game element to it, in that like getting down the timing of how like the cooldown between drills is so important, which is different for each character. It's just really interesting to me how this game kind of hybridizes a lot of different kinds of play into this into the core Driller experience. It's a really interesting and kind of unique thing.
That's absolutely right.
I think it as a puzzle game, this really feels extremely engaged and hands-on compared to a lot of this kind of game where you might have blocks slowly falling from the top of the screen. This really is about pathfinding and just getting the quickest possible route through these blocks and just like destroying whole swaths of them as you go. And the different modes play into this in different ways. Some of them you want to play a little bit more conservatively or a little bit faster, but the core gameplay is really just like you said, really be on the beat, really be nailing that drill button just at the right moment, and keeping your speed up and managing to
and
get
quickly
down as far as you
recognizing
can.
things like each time you see a new air capsule come onto screen, for example, usually it'll be surrounded by colored blocks in various configurations, and usually some of the X blocks that you can't drill through, or at least can't drill through without taking a real penalty.
You don't want to drill through
Right.
them. You can, you don't want to.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to. So a lot of the game for me is just glancing at those and very quickly analyzing, like, how do I get to that air capsule without getting crushed? And you'll see these sorts of different little configurations of those X blocks repeat themselves. Obviously there's some randomized stuff about how these blocks get arranged, but different levels have different sort of characters to that randomness. and you'll see these different sort of little arrangements or configurations of those X's, and you have to be able to quickly say, oh, it's one of those, and if I want to be able to get to that air capsule quickly, I'm going to need to drill out and let this block fall, or drill down from the top, or whatever else it requires. And you have to do that extremely quickly, because if you're not moving fast through this game, you're going to run out of air and lose your lives. So it's a really unique thing. I think of it more as an action puzzle game than just a straight puzzle game, because it's so fast.
That's what I was going to say. It feels more like an action game than a puzzle game. Just you're sitting trapped inside of a horrifying puzzle. And I constantly found myself, you want to go fast. This game feels best when you're going fast, and you're just like, just slicing through blocks and cutting through things, getting deeper and deeper and deeper. But when I was struggling the most is when I would be going too fast. Like, okay, I need to slow down. I need to make sure that I'm observing the board, and especially in some of the different versions of the core game that we play in this one, there's a lot of dangers out there that if you're not really analyzing the board entirely, you're just going to run into repeatedly and die really fast. So it definitely felt like a push-pull of go really, really fast when you know you're clear, and then slow down and maybe navigate a little bit to make sure that you get through some of the more single block areas where things are going to fall on you more likely, and then burn through the bigger block areas. I do have a quick question, though, since you're all driller experts. Is it that the drill is air-powered, or are you running out of air because you're getting deeper into the earth or wherever this is? Or are they one and the same, which seems like a bad design?
No, we see in a cutscene that the drill is powered by a battery.
Of course. Well, the big drill.
If you refer to this cutscene, you'll clearly see. No, they need air because they're people. They're people. They need breathe.
Well, except for Horinger Z, but he's apparently also air powered or something.
He's a hybrid.
So is it cutting through an X block? You just like really exert.
It just takes a lot of work. You just
really have to breathe.
I think there's poison gas inside them. I think you get like a little animation of gas coming out of them when you break.
Yeah, I was gonna say it looked like little farts come out.
Okay.
They're fart blocks.
The whole thing reminds me of the horror film The Descent. Of course, it's the going deep into the ground. There's not enough air. It's dark. It's claustrophobic. It's really just the lack of air is one of the horror elements of the game.
It's colorful. There's star blocks.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is not at all The Descent. It's super bright, and there's like you can be a puppy dog going through all of this if you want to.
Well, it's interesting. This is kind of one of the fun tensions of Mr. Driller. Is can be a very stressful and scary game, but it's also like a really happy, colorful game where the blocks that you're drilling through are like literally pastries for like underground people. Like you're just drilling a bunch of cakes, but you're also running out of air and drowning alone underneath the surface of the planet.
Yeah, can you imagine anything worse than drilling down 1,000 meters and suffocating to death? Like, I definitely can't.
Amidst a pile of cakes, yes, it's too horrifying to think about.
What you mentioned there is like it reminded me that I really want to take a second and talk about the look of this game and the visuals, because we very briefly touched on that, but like. One of the things that has always really appealed to me about the Mr. Driller series is the design, specifically of the characters, but also just the blocks and everything too. I think it's this sort of like perfect encapsulation, or it's this sort of perfect example of what I didn't have a word for until pretty recently, but have started seeing people refer to as Y2K design, or like Y2K era design, which makes perfect sense, of course, because the very first game came out in 1999. And it's a style, like a visual style that I have a really hard time describing. But I can say that like back in the 90s and 2000s, I hated this style. I thought it looked really ugly. And it's grown on me an incredible amount, to the point where I have like incredible fondness for it now. But I'm having a really hard time like describing it. It's these large-headed, it's not exactly like an anime style. It's more like big-headed, slightly, anime chibi style, but also
kind
with
of
this sort
like
of like
everything in the world is made of capsules.
Yeah. Everything's shiny. All the characters are wearing like jumpsuits, sometimes that have little like shiny parts to them, massive heads, lots of like Susumu, the main character, his helmet has those big like ear cups on the sides that make him look like he's wearing massive headphones.
It's like Bomberman.
Kind of, yeah. He's a bit Bomberman, but like I don't know. Like, there's something very particular about this style. I don't know how to put my finger on it exactly.
Yeah, so there's a few things I could tie into there. One is the Y2K aesthetic of the original iMac. If you can think about the shiny, glossy, candy color iMac, and then kind of tie that back with. I don't know, stuff like Jet Set Radio character design, or what's that dance game? Or also, it makes me kind of think of those. Now that's what I think of. Now that's what I call music. Kind of.
That's what I call drilling. Yeah, it's interesting because if you look at all of the Mr. Driller games from like 1999 to Mr. Driller Drill Land, they kind of go from like being like very round and like soft to being extremely pointy.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can see them get more and more like hyper, like Y2K. Everyone's body parts get like much longer.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's limbs get like stretchier.
The deeper you get into the ground, the more you get pressed in, and your features become sharper.
Yeah, makes sense. After years and years of being the world's greatest driller, Susumu has become an absolute horror show. Yeah,
it's gravity poisoning. Yeah,
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they sort of drift from like Powerpuff Girls to like kind of sharper Powerpuff Girls.
Well, paint a picture with your words.
Although interestingly, like not a lot of female characters in the Mr. Driller franchise. Maybe now's a good time for us to talk about some of the characters in particular. Although we won't get to talking about how they play for a minute, maybe. But like the main character, Susumu Hori. Here we're getting into lore. If you sat down at the Mr. Driller arcade machine, the very first one, you probably wouldn't have seen the name Susumu Hori. This would have just been Mr. Driller. In much the way that sitting down at a Dig Dug machine, you wouldn't have probably learned that the main character's name is apparently Taizo Hori, or that he has a wife and a wife that he's divorced from, and a son.
They're separated.
Exactly.
I always like to think of his name as Dig Dug. It's Dig Dug.
That's a formal title. Technically, that's the code name for the mission that he goes on in Dig Dug, the arcade game.
Well, I mean, we all know that. Yeah, of course, we all know.
Obviously. Listen, I'm a professor. Okay, I know the lore.
Thank you. You mentioned that you have some notes. Maybe you have notes on the various characters and their.
Oh my god! Yeah. So there's only so much we can cover in this podcast. The cast of, by the time we get to Drillland, which is in some important ways kind of the last original game in the series, the game has such a huge extended cast that connects with so many different games. But the important ones, I guess. So as you mentioned, we have Susumu Hori, the original Mr. Driller, solver, who saved the world from the Mr. Driller incident. His dad is Taizo Hori. And to explain these names a little bit, I'm not a very good Japanese knower, but Hori Susumu apparently means dig onward, and Hori Taizo means I want to dig. So Hori Taizo is Dig Dug, but he's like this washed up boomer Dig Dug. Like in my notes, I have written down probably in AA.
He's got the facial hair.
He is just like red face constantly. There's like a weird generation gap between these characters. Also in the Mr. Driller family. So Dig Dug is Susumu's dad. We've got Susumu's mom is Tobi Masuyo, which apparently means I want to fly. or something similar than that. She's from a kind of more obscure game called Baraduke that Namco put out in 1985. This is a game where it's kind of more of a shooter, but it is a game about going underground. It's kind of a Metroid-y kind of thing. She shows up in Drillland more than she shows up anywhere else in the series. So that's very cool. They're hella separated because he's a Dig Dug is a wreck at this point.
Life underground, that'll do it.
It'll do it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a rough life.
You also have, let's see, we've got Poochie, not Dig Dug's, Susumu's talking dog. We have Ataru, Susumu's goth brother. We have Anna Hottenmeier, who is the rival. He originally was introduced as Susumu's rival in Dig Dug 2, except that now they're cool and like maybe they have like a crush on each other. It's weird. They have a weird flirtation. There's the robot, Horringer Z, who was introduced because a game, you have to have a robot in an extended universe.
As is the law.
Usagi is the forward scout of an army of alien rabbits trying to take over the Earth. So that's a character you can play.
Of course.
I think that's the main cast. And then
that's definitely all the playable ones. Yeah,
that's all the playable characters. So there's a lot of people in this game.
Yeah, and every single one of them, I mean, one of the things that really is great about this game is that it has these incredibly overproduced cartoon intros and cutscenes, and also lots of places in the game to tell you important information that Namco Bandai wants you to know about the entire cast. So, for example, there's a library that you can go to
from Namco Bandai.
Exactly, and you can collect cards in this game, and the cards tell you backstory about all of the characters, including the enemies and everybody and their backstory and everything. For instance, if you get the card about Susumu's mom, you not only learn her name and that she was the hero of the Baraduke mission, but also that she's now retired from the Space Force and is working as a novelist and lives close to her separated husband to support their children together because they're on good terms even though they're separated. That's a sort of
it's really important. Yeah, you got to know this stuff because if you're going to watch their soul ascend to heaven,
guys, if you want to get good at puzzle games, look, people look at this and they think this is just Dig Dug meets Tetris, but no.
No, there's a lot more. And every single version or every single that we've said there's 5 different game styles. Every time you start one, you are treated with these very produced cartoons that seem to have nothing to do with anything, that I assume are tying this world together. But again, from having never played these before.
Yeah, you have to click through 2 layers of cutscenes just to get to the place where you can hit A to drill. And one of those cutscenes is the absolutely precious song Dig a Chance.
Oh, I love it.
There's so much going on.
Has lyrics like, "You're putting on your pink helmet and playfully twisting your bangs. As there's love and courage, there's nothing you can break through. As soon as the maze begins to collapse and you pretty much begin to cry, there's energy in your arms. That's right. The world is here today and tomorrow." It's really inspiring.
Don't worry, listeners. I will play some of that song for you now.
It's a really catchy song.
It is. I can't think of a game that like, and I'm sure there's others, but I can't think of a game that has like had so much effort with the plot and like the lore of the world, and then for the actual core gameplay to have nothing to do with any of the things that you just watched.
Well, this is one of the incredible things about Drillin in particular. That this is a series that you know there's all this lore. This series was like 4 years old when this game came out.
I know.
Like there was just this like rapid combinatorial explosion of all these different like story elements and characters and all this stuff.
Someone at Namco Bandai really, really loved this property and wanted to make it the linchpin of their entire
project of a few people.
Yeah.
And
you really feel that love when you play it because it is an incredibly beautifully produced game. Even the original GameCube version is just like oozing with this care for something that is like a great game, but also surprising to see that level of care in all of these sort of ancillary aspects to it. One other thing while we're still talking about lore, because obviously this is one of the fun things about this game, and I wanted to mention it. So this game was obviously like where Namco, for some reason in the early 2000s, decided to start tying every single one of their disparate properties together into a common universe. And this is sort of the linchpin of that tying together, a sort of massive project that seems to have completely fallen by the wayside by now, but apparently is still part of the canon of Namco Bandai. And it extends much further than it seems like from just this game. So like, because this game is set in the world of Dig Dug and also the world of, Baraduke, and, Baraduke was the main character of that was fighting for the United Galaxy Space Force. Well, this actually extends to an entire universe of games that connect almost everything that Namco Bandai had done up to that point and some things that came after. So,
where is Pac-Man in this?
I think he's probably in there somewhere.
No, he's living his life. Pac-Man 2, you ever play that? He's living his nice little life off of his little cottage. No. He's having a good time living his life.
I have a list of games that are related, that are part of this same universe, what's called the United Galaxy Space Force universe that this game is apparently set in. And I'm not going to list all of them because there's over 30, but you can imagine it's a lot of games that this ties together into a common shared universe, including things like Galaga Galaxian and its sequels, the Galaxian games, including Ace Combat 3 Electrosphere, apparently, for some reason. I don't know why. Including both of the Dig Dug games, obviously, Star Trigon, something called Starblade, Thunder Scepter,
the Star Trigon characters appear in Star Driller.
Oh, is that
they're just hanging out?
Yeah. So anyway, long list of games that are a part of the United Galaxy Space Force universe, and I really love this. I don't know why, because it seems like an incredibly bad idea executed in a mediocre way, but it's a wonderful thing about the game that I just love. Anyway, that's the lore of Mr. Driller. Anybody have anything else to say?
Nothing but questions at this point. Please go on.
Yeah. I just want to touch on, this is a bit of a spoiler for this game. So,
by the way, while you're speaking there, just for a second to interrupt you, because I wanted to mention
Did
it.
you hear
Listeners,
that?
yes, I can. Listeners, if you're hearing explosions in the background, that is because we are recording this on July 4th. And sorry for any audio issues that may come as a part of that. But I'll do my best to edit around it. But we're recording on July 4th evening.
The evening of July 4th. And we're recording it right as the sun is setting. So
right
all the people have been waiting. Yeah, right when it's time to do fireworks. But that's our commitment to our listeners.
So sorry for the explosion noises, and sorry for the failed state that is the United States of America.
Yes.
Can I say that on your podcast?
Yes, you can. It's with the celebration of America going on. There's nothing I'd rather be doing than talking about Mr. Driller.
most of the villains in the game don't do any actual villaining.
No, they're just working at the theme park.
They're just janitors.
So the funniest thing to me about this game, because I really, the gameplay to this game was so fun, and I have really enjoyed playing this game, but I've had, it's been impossible for me to like have any ground to stand on with these characters. The way it's presented to you is as if you already, of course, you know all of these characters, and now it's time to really have them interact with each other and make little jokes and have like little of the moment things. And I'm just sitting here like, what the hell is going on? And then
this was kind of typified by the moment when so they've been introduced to the theme park by the doctor guy who created the theme park, the world's first underground theme park, and Poochie the dog is like, doesn't he kind of remind you of someone? Like, how on earth?
I don't know. Yeah, and so you. I
mean, doesn't he remind you of someone from the Game Boy Advance game that came out 2 years ago? That you probably
yes,
I know.
Yeah.
So you're incentivized.
I believe his name and his disguise name is like Fluid, but with like
Dr.
an umlaut. So it's cool. And his actual identity, I won't reveal because I don't want to spoil.
That would be a spoiler.
Yeah. Oh no, please don't.
The incredible Act 3 twist of this game.
Yeah. So you go. So it's clear you need to go to all the attractions and play all 5 variants of the Driller universe. But there's nothing that is compelling you to do that other than the game. It's clear that you need to do that in the game, and there's some like light setup that like, hey, we should go and do all the things, right? This is a fun amusement park, and you're doing the fun amusement park, and then on a dime it becomes a serious action plot that has you do one more little puzzle, and then you watch like an 8-minute video, like a full on short cartoon of they explain the problem. You watch the characters deal with the problem and then resolve the problem, and then it's credits.
I have to say about all the cartoon elements of this, I have a 2-year-old son who absolutely loved these cartoons.
Oh, they look and sound great.
He loves it. And these things are fully voiced in Japanese, so he doesn't understand anything that's happening in these cartoons. I would occasionally read some of the on-screen subtitles to him, but he has liked this game so much to the point where he'll come to me and he'll be like, I just want to play Mr. Driller with you guys. and he's super into it. So I am gonna have to be I'm gonna be continuing to like collect things in this game, because he's extremely in on Mr. Driller. I think his favorite is Poochie.
Of course.
Nice.
Really likes
Well,
Poochie.
of course.
Yeah.
It was it sounds great. I'm here for it. It was fun and it was funny. I've just never had a game that I've been like, oh, this is fun. There's no plot. And then the plot is introduced, dealt with, and resolved all out of my control and in through a cartoon. It was awesome. But
it is
it's really interesting, because this game is the game that like people know as like the big game in the Mr. Driller series. But everything that happens in the plot is referencing something that happened in Mr. Driller G, which is like kind of the previous game. So that's the one. Mr. Driller G is the game where all the plot happens, and now we're just in the game where we go to an amusement park.
I know, it's like the Hot Springs episode in the middle of the anime or something.
Yeah,
Did I just show my wee bass there?
It's very much a bottle episode.
Yeah,
it's so weird.
It's
like, again,
very
there's all these
strange.
characters who show up, and like all the janitors are like the like evil team from the last game, but all they basically do is like run around and like be like, hey, yeah, I guess we got this part-time job now. Oh, I'm gonna be a weird stalker, I guess, to the emo driller kid. But yeah, this is all we're gonna do. But
it's like, who's she has a crush on what's his face? Awesome, glad to see it. Love it. It is really, really
so
strange and wonderful.
To me.
I love it so much. I feel like we do need to get into talking about the various different modes, which are the kind of core like
Please.
the thing about this
Yes.
game. There are
Yes.
5 main. It's essentially a collection of 5 Mr. Driller games. Each one has its own twist. And the first one we probably don't need to talk about very much because we've already been talking about it. The main mode is called Drill Land World Tour, which is exactly previous Mr. Driller games. The sort of theming is this sort of like you
it's a small world.
it's a small world, exactly. It's a small world, and so as you drill down through the earth, you get like little songs and graphics based on different countries. I will briefly say though that this is the mode that has my favorite song. There's a lot of great songs on the soundtrack, and I'll probably try to play some of them as we go. But I really, really love the I forget what it's called. There's a song in the middle of that level where it breaks from maybe tense music at the beginning, and suddenly you're hearing a cheerful song sung by a sort of artless Japanese schoolboy choir that's like singing about Susumu and what a great driller he is, presumably. I love the soundtrack for this and how completely like unashamedly goofy it gets.
'The whole soundtrack just across the board is fantastic, and it just jumps from genre to genre. It'll be like a smooth jazz track to like a funky sort of K-pop sounding thing to whatever. It's great.
There's a track on this. There's a track on this soundtrack called "The Food of the Dragon is the People." And I love that title so much. And it's also a really kick-ass song because it's this sort of like weird acid jazz flute thing that sounds like it's trying to go for a fantasy vibe. And it's super cool. There's so many weird tracks on this thing.
It made me think of it made me think of Katamari
are we talking
a little
about the
bit.
different modes?
I know we got sidetracked, but
this is the thing. Like, I literally have written in my notes, like, this soundtrack would have been as big as the Katamari soundtrack if the game came out over here.
I 100% agree.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's
like
a great soundtrack.
It's so eclectic, such a wild mix. Are we officially talking about the soundtrack?
Okay, let's do that now because this is the spot for it.
Okay.
Yes, we're talking about the soundtrack.
So this soundtrack for this game was composed by a guy named Go Shina, who by this point in the series was the official Mr. Driller soundtrack person.
What a title.
So this is like, he's like worked on a lot of Namco games that like you would probably know. He worked on Idolmaster, Tekken, Ace Combat, Code Vein, and he works on animes. I don't know anything about animes, so I don't know which ones. He used to. I was doing some research on him. He used to be a member of, like, when he was in school, a J-pop Megadeth cover band. So like Megadeth but J-pop.
Whoa.
Yeah. And that kind of explains a lot about the soundtrack of this game.
It
feel
does.
like.
Yeah.
The other cool thing that I kind of unearthed. Oh, that's okay. Drilling, sure. He first worked on, the first Mr. Driller game he worked on was the original Mr. Driller in 1999. The songs that he turned in, they were like, I don't know if this fits a puzzle game. Like, they were just too like poppy, and like they were just like a little too like, they were like, this doesn't feel like tense and contemplative. This feels like happy and whimsical and interesting. And then by Mr. Driller G, he was like running the music for the
Nice.
entire franchise. So it shows what they know.
Clearly. And also, that's exactly what the Mr. Driller series is, right? It's not that like solemn contemplative
that's what
Tetris
it
thing.
becomes, right? Over the course of like this 5-year period of extremely rapid iteration, it becomes this like wild, splashy, eclectic like mix of a million different things, which is why Drillland, I don't know, is like so fascinating.
It works too.
Stylistically, it's so many things.
Yeah, I really, really love the music. The variant of the game that I enjoyed the most out of all these was the Horror House variant, which has a fantastic song and fantastic music all around that changes the deeper you get. I know that's how they all work, but changes and changes in style multiple times the deeper you get. So the thing I liked about the Horror House variant was how it adds a new wrinkle into how you're used to playing the standard digger mechanic, which is kind of go fast. You can drill any block, just make sure you don't get crushed, right? Well, in the Horror House one, they now add these ghosts that can travel through all of the blocks. And if you break a block that has a ghost in it, then you get surrounded by bats and you lose oxygen or lose air. So you now have to, not only are you trying to avoid being crushed and you're managing your air supply as you get deeper, but you also are being blocked from breaking certain blocks, whereas you hadn't really had to worry about that as much. Your traversal path, at least from like the core game, was fine. You were mostly just trying to go fast and avoid being crushed. Now you're trying to go fast, avoid being crushed, and avoid breaking blocks that have ghosts in them. And they're following you. They're trying to get in front of you. They're trying to, if you stand still, they'll get up next to you and they like puke out of the block onto you. And it does a significant amount of damage. It's like 30 air or something like that. So you have to move fast because you don't want to get ghost puked on. But you can't move so fast that you're just chopping through blocks, because sometimes there'll be multiple ghosts in one block. And so if you break a block that has multiple ghosts, you get really hurt. And then, but the way you actually win is by killing these ghosts. And this is where it felt like Pac-Man to me, because there's holy water all throughout the level just sitting there. And you walk over it to fill up your bucket. And then when you press B at a block, it injects that block with holy water and kind of fills most of the blocks in the direction that you sort of injected the holy water. And any ghost that happens to be in those blocks that kind of get washed over by holy water, they freeze. And if you break the block while it's still shining with the holy water, you can collect their capsule. So it feels similar to like in Pac-Man when you get the power pellet and you have a very short window of time to actually go aggressively at the ghosts instead of just constantly trying to avoid them. And when you break the block, you collect this like power crystal. And that's actually the goal of the level, is to kill or is to collect a certain amount of these power pellets. So it doesn't really matter how deep you go, but you're going to have to go deep because that's how you get more holy water. And so it became this weird or really challenging, but really enjoyable mechanic of trying to avoid ghosts to get to the holy water, and then trying to aggressively go at the ghost, because that's ultimately the mission of the level. And I really, really enjoyed it. It was fun to have that sort of holy water mechanic where you kind of clear an area and you just run through it as fast as possible. It is really cool, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's my favorite of the 5 different ones.
I like this one a lot too. And what was surprising to me about it, I didn't put this together when I played the game back on in my case, the Wii. But playing it now, I realized how Dig Dug inspired this particular zone or level is. It's so much more like Dig Dug than any of the other, other modes, because you've got those free floating enemies that can travel through the environment that you're having to drill through. They can just sort of float through it, and they're invulnerable until you, in the case of this game, pump them with holy water, or with Dig Dug, it would have been your air pump or whatever. But it felt very Dig Dug to me in a way that I really, really liked. I don't remember playing much of this one back on the original version, but here I really enjoyed this mode.
Yeah, it has this really, it gets really, really tense because like of the tension between like you're trying to find a path to the next like holy water chalice or whatever bottle, but like you're trying so hard not to accidentally drill a block that has a ghost in it, and the moments where you accidentally do without realizing it, and then there's just like you just get swarmed by bats, are genuinely scary. Like those are like jump scare moments.
They're great. Loved that.
It's really like visceral.
So my favorite of the modes here, and one that I had a lot easier time with now than I did back when I played the original version of the game in Japanese, was the Whole of Druaga mode. So if you aren't familiar, it's a reference to Tower of Druaga, which is a arcade game that Namco put out way in the past, and I don't really know much about it. I know it's a very influential and popular game and kind of a proto RPG.
The thing that everyone knows Druaga for is that it's super obscure. That it's like, in order to beat this one enemy, you need to press the left wall of like this level 5 times. It's very Proto Legend of Zelda in the sense that like, in order to play it, you kind of need to share knowledge between different people that which is kind of interesting. As thinking about arcades as social spaces where knowledge is transmitted between people.
Yeah, and this actually has a little bit of that in that some of the rules of this mode are not really directly presented to you. Namely, the fact that you have to. This is a mode where rather than just drilling straight down, the game is arranged into kind of rooms or I guess chambers that are full of blocks. And as you drill down through it, you can either exit through the bottom and go on to the next mode or next, chamber if there is one. Or sometimes the exits will be on the sides and you have to get out that way. And they kind of string these driller chambers together into a kind of a mini dungeon. And the goal is a little more complicated. Rather than just get to the bottom in a certain amount of time, there are enemies that you have to kill along the way. And there are stones that you'll pick up along the way that you can use at any time in order to have some effect. Usually they're little simple stuff like gain some HP. That's another thing I'll mention in a second. Or you can get a shield. But the really important ones are blocks to change the color of the blocks around you. So you can change a bunch of blocks around you to blue or red or what have you. And then there's another type of stone you can collect that lets you destroy all of the visible blocks of a particular color. So a big part of this is drilling through these levels and collecting these stones as you go, and then using those stones to take out other blocks. Also, you have a little bit more of a complicated mission here. Rather than just get to the bottom, you have to first navigate through this little mini dungeon and find a dragon that then you have to fight and take a key from it. And then you have to take that key and find another room with a boss gate. Use that key to open the boss gate and then face the boss, Druaga. And fighting Druaga.
Yuri in a costume, one of the,
yes.
One of the bad guys.
Love that.
And like suspended from like fishing line.
Everything in this has this sort of like, barely poorly assembled theme park attraction kind of vibe
together.
going. And I love that about it. Everything is somebody in a costume. And
speaking of costumes in this one, this is where we see Susumu in a dress, which is just adorable.
Oh, that is really cute when you get to the bottom.
It is Anna Hottenmeier, who is the player character here, saving Susumu, who is wearing a princess dress, which is very, very funny and adorable.
Yeah.
Oh, the gender roles of Mr. Driller are like so complicated. And I'm like, that's not a joke. I'm like being genuinely sincere about
Yeah,
that.
like everything else about Mr. Driller, it's overcomplicated.
Uh-huh.
It is a little bit. They only have one female driller, and yet she's not the princess that you rescue. So who else would you pick but Mr. Driller himself?
Well, they're both. This is. I don't know. We have time for another tangent. But Susumu and
I'm all
Anna,
for it if you've got time for tangents.
I mean, Susumu and Anna are both have both very non-traditional performances of their genders. Susumu is like very femme, and is like, very very pastel. And
he
Anna
literally wears pink, and
wears
got
like pink and like powder blue. Anna is presented as like kind of very butch, but there's also this element where like she's also a foreigner. She's like German, and so there's this like stereotype of like the non-Japanese woman as the more aggressive one. If you watch Ava, Asuka is the kind of the same thing.
Oh my god! Yeah.
But then Susumu also has this dad, Taizo, who represents this like kind of Japanese masculinity that's kind of dying, that's like really outmoded, that's like very kind of very emotional and macho, but like isn't really what young Japanese men aren't really right now. I mean, again, I'm not Japanese, nor am I like an expert in this, but it's so interesting that like in this game, like Druaga is when it was originally released, was like a really traditional, like you play as like a dude who rescues a girl. Even though they're based on Gilgamesh and Enkidu, who were both men who were lovers. So there's just like so many layers, interest like of gender play and inversion in like encoded into like this whole Druaga stuff. I don't know. It's very interesting. Someone should pay me to write an essay about it.
I would read that essay. I would absolutely read that. And that's definitely like, I like the theming here. I like the fact that it ties back to this classic Druaga game. The final boss is really obscure, the way that you kill it. Although, I mean, if you study the menus, like you can figure it out. But I definitely like didn't know it initially, particularly when everything was in Japanese. So you have to get to him. You can't damage the boss directly. You have to use the stones that destroy things of a certain color, matching his aura. He glows in different colors.
Technically her.
Oh, excuse me. That's right. I'm sorry. Because the costume situation. And I'm not even sure I really realized who was in the costume when I was looking at it now that you mentioned. In any case, you damage the boss using the stones, and you can use the stones that recolor blocks to also recolor the boss, which is it seems like it'd be really difficult when you get down to that boss to, have to use a consumable item to take out the boss, which seemed on the face of it like it was going to be really annoying. But actually, I really enjoyed that because you're constantly drilling through an endless drill zone or whatever at that point. And so a big part of that is you use whatever stones you happen to take with you into that boss area. And if you still haven't killed Druaga, you have to continue drilling as fast as you can and hope to get the stones that you need to take out the boss for the last little bit of its health. And I actually really, really enjoy that aspect of it. I don't know if there's anything else I missed there, but this is a much more complicated mode than any of the others. And it's one that I didn't get on very well with in the Japanese. So having English language text in the menus actually made a big difference for me here on this one. So I was surprised I liked this one as much as I did on this version.
There is an interesting like element of like resource management in that there's like kind of a trade-off between like trying to like get through to the boss as quickly as possible, but also trying to make sure that you have like enough items to fight the boss when you get there. I know it has an interesting balance.
And also fighting enemies along the way. Some of these other modes have enemies in them like the ghosts, but this is, I think, the only mode where you're directly having to like fight enemies with your drill.
Melee combat.
Yeah. And it works better than you'd think. And it made me think like they should just have, I mean, if they were making more driller games, I think like it doesn't seem like it would work on the face of it, but having enemies that can hurt you in the game that you have to drill to kill is actually a lot of fun, because a lot of it is trying
Drill to kill.
I know I did
I
not.
was gonna say, I think you got something there.
Jesus,
Drill to kill.
that sounds like a horror movie.
Put that on a shirt with
a picture of Suzuki. But yeah, it's more fun than you'd think. Like I really liked having to figure out how to approach those enemies in a way that I could attack them without taking damage in return. And there were a lot more approaches than you would think, given the really simple mechanics there. So I had a great time with this mode. It's the one I spent the most time on.
Mm-hmm. Before we just like kind of move on from this, can I just like quickly just like give a shout out to Drindy Adventure, which I think is either my favorite or just the one I've spent the most time with, because I kept dying just like right near the end of the like level 2
Mm-hmm.
run. So Drindy Adventure is just, I'll give a real quick, is like this Indiana Jones themed like take on it, starring Dig Dad.
Yeah, this was my favorite as well. I was not going to let us move on without talking about Drindy
excellent.
Adventure.
Good. The interesting thing about this one, there are a couple interesting things. One is that blocks don't chain. So like normally, if you destroy a block and then it causes other blocks to fall, and those blocks match with other blocks of their color, those would also fall. So you can normally set off like enormous chain reactions. That doesn't happen here. So this is kind of more of a like slower paced, in some ways, a like more puzzly kind of game. But also there are these rolling boulder blocks that are just the assholes of Mr. Driller Drillland. And
yes,
the second they're unleashed, they start to roll in a direction. They can destroy other blocks. They take multiple hits to break, and if they touch you, you die. And in this game,
they reverse. They'll roll until they hit something, and they'll roll the other way.
Their behavior is actually really interestingly complicated. And so this game is kind of largely about understanding the ways in which these things move, and like figuring out how to unpick them.
Mm-hmm.
They also place them in a really interesting way, I found, with the non-moving blocks. There's these structure blocks that don't fall. And then also the traps, which are really interesting, because they start off just by placing them next to the gold statues that you have to collect 10 of to progress. But then they also have things like spike blocks that will stab you if you stand next to them. And they seem very deliberately placed in configurations with these traps. So they really are trying to get you here.
Yeah, those boulders drove me crazy. Every time I think, I know it, I got this. You would think a slow-moving boulder in a game that you have, like, you can dig, you can go fast. You would think you could just dig away from these fucking boulders, but they get you.
Right down on you.
You can't dig away from all your problems.
I try. And then you finally think you do, and you've run into a spike trap, just like life.
This is like another thing that's really fun about Mr. Driller Drillland, is that all of these different side games kind of extrapolate on different aspects of the main game that are interesting. So like Drindy Adventure is like developing those parts of the main game, which is where you're like, you found like an oxygen tank surrounded by X blocks, and you're like, how do I get that out of there? And Drindy Adventure is kind of a whole game about that, about just like unpicking these interesting knots. So I don't know. What's really cool about all these like 5 different games is that they each kind of explore one other aspect of play that's really cool about the core game of Mr. Driller. I don't know.
I completely agree. And that's what makes this whole package so, like, it makes it the capstone of the Mr. Driller series. And even if you don't care about the Mr. Driller series, this is the definitive version of that. So if you're a newcomer to Mr. Driller, or if you've played any of the other games, but you want something maybe a little more meaty, this has so much. There's just so much to this game, like much more than you expect going into a puzzle game. More lore, more variety, more game types
more music,
so much
Yeah.
music. It's
I think if I completely agree. I think if you just bought a game and it was just like the Horror House or just Drindy's Adventure, and I think you would play it, it'd be fun, but you'd probably move on. The fact that you get all 5 of these and the skills that you have from one do carry over to the other. You're getting better at drilling. You're getting better at managing the worlds. It just complicates it a little bit, and it makes you reframe the skills that you've already had. Maybe instead of drilling as fast, now I have to slow down a little bit because there's ghosts. Or maybe now I need to speed up because there's boulders chasing me, right? It's the same thing. It's just complicating it, and it really brings it all together. I think it really, really works, and I had a lot of fun, even though I didn't understand 95% of what was happening in this game. The core game was fun. It was really, really fun. I'd never played any of these, and I'm really glad that we did this game because I've been really having a great time with it. And the difficulty escalates pretty fast too. The second level of all of these are considerably harder than the first, so it really scales. And this game has a lot of depth to it, I think.
So this game miraculously is out on Nintendo Switch and I believe also PC, Steam, right? So
it's on Steam.
Yeah.
Also, if you have a Switch, there's a free demo of it on the Switch.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if there's a demo on the stream, but there's the Switch. You can see if this like weird, extremely hard drilling game like works for you.
Totally.
Before you buy it.
Yeah, and one last thing that you just reminded me we didn't mention at the top is that this version of the game added a new difficulty mode, which from what I understand isn't a huge reworking of the game, but the original game is still there in its original form, but there's also a quote-unquote casual mode that basically, from what I understand, just increases the number of lives you get for various modes by 1.
Is that what it does?
Yeah, that's what I heard. I haven't actually verified that. Did anybody play the casual mode?
I played on casual. And
yeah, that's what I did too.
Got crushed by 10,000 boulders.
Yeah, a million ghosts puked all over me on casual mode.
All right. Well, so casual mode, I think, is probably great for if you're new to the Driller games. And if you want, the original mode is still there. So up to you. And I'm really, really glad that this finally got a release. I honestly, when I saw that this was coming out and getting a full English translation, I was absolutely floored, totally shocked. I can't believe this thing came out on the Switch. It's wild. So
I'm so excited for people to like discover this series.
Me too.
Yeah.
So if you haven't checked this out, it is on Nintendo Switch and Steam. I believe it is $30, which is I feel like a little bit of a premium price for a puzzle game. But what you don't understand is like it's so big.
It's 5 games plus a parade. What do you mean?
And a Saturday morning cartoon all right in there. You got everything.
Yeah, so I was 100% happy to pay that, and if you prefer it on Steam, I actually think it's a little cheaper on Steam. I think it's $20 on Steam if I saw that correctly. So if you're budget conscious, there you go. But this is so worth your time and worth picking up. And in terms of how long it takes to play, which is an important factor for our show, I got through the level 1 chunk, basically completing each zone and then seeing the end credits within, I think, about 3 hours or 4 hours. And that was sort of dusting off some old skills. That's probably going to vary a lot depending on how familiar you are with the Driller games, which mode you're playing on, etc. And then, of course, you can then go in and play through level 2. And then there's a final level, which I forget. It's not called level 2. It's like Maxed or something like that.
There's a level 3, and then there's special, which... Yeah. I have no idea what that is because I am not that good.
I'm not that special either. No, I've never actually gotten to level 3 on these, so I'm excited to try that now that I think I'm getting a little better at it than I was back
Level
in the day.
3 is so hard. Level 3 is so hard.
I will say I have spent as much time on level 2 of Horror House as I spent on the entire first level of all 5 other games.
Yeah,
if
it's
that makes
definitely
sense.
it definitely ramps up, but in a good way. It's the kind of thing where like I was
Yeah.
really
Oh, yeah.
excited to hit a new level of difficulty and continue trying. So that's
Yeah.
really what this game is all about, and hopefully folks will enjoy it. If so, obviously, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, Anna. This was really great to have you
Yeah,
on.
thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I wanted to also mention that, so I didn't really give Anna a particularly great intro at the top because I was so excited to talk about
You're
Mr.
so excited
Driller.
about drilling.
I was very excited about drilling. So in case you don't know who Anna is the professor, excuse me for using your full academic title here. Anna is the professor and game designer in residence at DePaul University College of Computing and Digital Media, and also an incredibly good follow on Twitter, and just an incredibly good thinker and writer about game design and game design in all kinds of ways. So I've been following Anna's work for years. It's been many years now, but I read a game design vocabulary, and I've been following your various game design output over the years, and I just got a chance to check out the most recent thing that I think you released, which was Tavern at the End of the World. So you've been putting out a number of these sort of micro, sort of solo tabletop RPGs recently. Do you mind talking a little bit about Tavern at the End of the World and like what it is, and maybe some of the other games that are part of that work that you're doing?
Yeah. So lately I've been working on these kind of solo role-playing games that you play with a deck of tarot cards. Mostly because I have a lot of decks of tarot cards now, and I wanted more reasons to use them. And so, Tavern at the End of the World is a solo game where you are kind of running a tavern. You're running a tavern that kind of operates as like a gray market, black market business in a town that's under military occupation, which is something that's probably familiar to you if you live in the United States of America right now. And so it's a journaling game. You are kind of drawing cards, receiving, using the cards to generate people visiting your tavern. Using coins to decide whether they whether they bring heat down on you, and you're keeping a journal in coded language in case it ever gets confiscated, about kind of what goes on in your tavern. And so I released this game as part of a bundle with 3 other amazing creators. And the bundle is called the Needle in a Gay Stack bundle.
Love it.
It's a Pride themed bundle, although we didn't end up launching it until the end of Pride Month.
Still counts.
It has, yeah, and it's running for the next month, so you have until like July 25th, I think. $25 gets you 8 different games, mostly tabletop games. There's a couple of LARPs. There's one interactive fiction game. All very queer games by queer creators about themes of queerness and marginalization. I have a couple games in there. There's a game about a game that you play by stripping in front of the other player, and you're also both demigods who have crushes on each other. There's a game about trying to hijack marijuana drones, like a marijuana drone startup, but you're like throwing dice with pipe. It's a really incredible bundle of a lot of incredible stuff. And 20% of the money that we raise is going to the Trans Needles organization, which is an organization that sends HRT supplies to trans people. Specifically, right now, they are focusing their work on supplying Black trans people with needles and HRT supplies. And so, by buying this bundle, you are not only helping support their work in helping the trans community, you are also supporting the livelihood and the work of 4 queer game designers and getting like 8 really cool games. I think they're cool.
I completely agree.
What a wonderful combination of causes and people. Yeah, absolutely.
Totally agree. And I haven't had a chance to check out any of the other stuff in the bundle yet, but I sat down with Tavern at the End of the World recently. I dug out a tarot deck and played through, I guess, like the first like day of this. I haven't completed the journey with my Tavern yet, but I've never really played solo sort of journaling RPGs like this before, and I don't know, like, I was surprised how much I enjoyed this as a style. Like, I think it's a really neat approach, and it also struck me as something that I would really enjoy, not just for myself, but also as a way of kind of, if you're, for example, like a dungeon master or something, or a GM or something, doing something like this is a great way to sort of brainstorm things for maybe a larger tabletop game too. And I just had a lovely time doing this as it's sort of a great quarantine activity. So I think it's really, really cool. I had never played one like this before, and it made me realize that this is a chunk of your work that I haven't gotten a chance to really spend time with. So I'm going to go check out some of the others of these that you've published. So thanks for talking about it.
Thank you.
When I buy the bundle, do I have to put in my address for the marijuana drone, or how does that work? I didn't quite follow that part.
No, you put your neighbor's address, and
nice.
and you just be in the right place at the right time.
That's perfect.
Yeah, that's good thinking.
The building next to me is empty right now, so it's even better.
Perfect.
That's awesome. So yeah, thank you so much again for coming on the show. I've always wanted to find an opportunity to bring you on just to chat, because it's very exciting to have you on.
It's so wild that as an indie game developer, of all the things that you could have had me on,
I know.
Your show to talk about.
Well, I've been looking at like
Namco property.
I've been looking for an opportunity to have you on, and it just hasn't. The right game and moment hasn't arisen for whatever reason. And then when I found out that you were a big fan of this game that I was also so excited about, I was like, weird, but also perfect opportunity. And hey, awesome! I'm really glad that you.
How about
made the right choice?
Yes.
How about we make sure it's not the last time?
Talk about this weird game I'm obsessed with.
All right. Anytime that you feel like, if you have a short game that you feel like talking about into a microphone, we are always glad to have you back. Thank you for coming on. So for folks who want to check out the show and all the things that we do, you can find us on the web at www.theshortgame.net. You've also got a contact form there where you can let us know about short video games that you think are interesting or would be right for the show. You can find us on Twitter at _shortgame. And of course, you can find us on all of the various podcast platforms. We like reviews. Please leave us them if you wouldn't mind. You can also find us on Patreon. We are patreon.com/theshortgame, and all of our patrons at even $1 a month, which we very much appreciate, get instant invites to our Discord where we talk about the games that we're playing on the show and also things that we're preparing to cover on the show, and also just general chit chat. So it's a great place to hang out if you want to talk about short video games on the internet. Anna, where can people, apart from obviously the great bundle on itch, where can maybe including that, where can people find you and your work?
So the easiest place to find out what's going on with me is at my Twitter account. I'm at adult_witch. You can also find all of my games on my itch page at w.itch.io or Witch.io.
I think everyone on itch or itch.io is jealous of your snagging that particular custom domain.
That's I had to use nepotism to get it.
Oh.
Whatever you gotta do.
The truth comes out, but I'm glad that you got it. It's perfect. And of course, Nate, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at NateSTL, and I also would like to give a shout out to Daedalus Divine for leaving us a fantastic review on iTunes. They said, fun conversation, good analysis, and great editing. They went on to say a lot of nice things about the production and this podcast. And so I want to say thank you for that wonderful review. And we're also really putting it to the test on this episode with all of the firework background. So good luck on this one, Reagan.
Yes, thank you. And Shane, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at 8BitShane.
And of course, you can find me on Twitter at ReaganK. That's RayGank. And thank you for listening to The Short Game.